The public trusting journalists these days is less common, and the idea that journalists and the media are devising fake news or hiding the complete truth is creating a further divide between the public and the media. And while a lot of the time the suspicion is unwarranted, there are certain instances where newspapers or broadcasters do make mistakes, whether they're intentional or not. To prevent these mistakes and errors of judgment in journalistic reporting, it's the very reason that MEAA standards were created, so that journalists, members of the MEAA or not, were able to use the standards to guide them in times of ethical dilemmas. Earlier this month, breakfast show Sunrise aired a segment that discussed the suggestion of whether or not Aboriginal children should be able to be adopted out to white families, rather than the current Indigenous child placement arrangement, as which they incorrectly stated, was that they were only able to be placed with family or other Aboriginal households. This, however, is untrue, as while the arrangement does prefer that Indigenous children are placed with next of kin or other households, they are able to be relocated to other families, including white ones. In fact, only 4 Aboriginal children last year were removed from their families to be adopted out, and according to the government statistics, 3 of the 4 of them were placed with non-Aboriginal families. Now, there were also some pretty awful comments that were said by one of the guest panellists, Prue McSween, who stated that if another stolen generation had to happen, then so be it. And the first stolen generation was for the children's own good. This is an opinion that is misformed, as it's pretty widely accepted that the children of the stolen generation were wrongfully removed from their families in an attempt not to aid, but to breed out the Indigenous population of Australia. Seven defended her comments and the segment as a whole by releasing a statement that said editorial opinions, either written or articulated, are a vital piece of journalism. This is not where the issues with the segment end though, as there was incorrect reporting not only with the facts, but also incorrect use of video footage. As they were discussing Indigenous abuse and violence towards children in Indigenous communities, they utilised a piece of video footage that 1, they didn't have permission to use, and 2, had no relevance towards what they were saying. The combination of the words and the footage depicted it to be a child that had suffered abuse and they were being medically handled. However, the footage was actually pulled from a documentary from a non-for-profit organisation, One Disease, and the child was actually receiving a skin cancer check. The use of this footage without consent from the owner eventuated in Sunrise having to take down the segment from the Seven site, however not before it created quite a whirlwind of controversy and sparked protests in Martin Place, outside the Sunrise windows. The protest lasted 3 days, however for those 3 days, Sunrise used a pre-recorded loop to block out the live windows and the real-time protests going on. Seeing as their reasoning behind airing the segment in the first place was, as Seven stated, opinions, either written or articulated, are a vital piece of journalism, it seemed unfair that they wouldn't then screen the opinion of hundreds of angry protesters. And although Seven spokeswoman did say that the reason they used the generic backdrop in all of this was due to some of the group holding offensive signage, Sunrise still made no real effort to properly acknowledge the outrage or give an official apology to the Indigenous community nor the Australian public for concealing many sectors of the truth, nor disclosing that the live backdrop was actually manipulated. So, where do the regulations and the MEAA fit into this? In regards to the issue of misreporting the facts, Sunrise breached Standard 1 of the MEAA, being that you have to report and interpret honestly, striving for accuracy, fairness, and disclosure of all essential facts, not to suppress relevant available facts or give distorting emphasis. And in regards to the issues of manipulating footage, Standard 9 was breached, as it reads, to present pictures and sound which are true and accurate, any manipulation likely to mislead should be disclosed, which clearly, in this case, it was not. And while those standards specifically were breached, the entire purpose of the MEAA and ethical journalism as a whole was disregarded. The biggest issue with this segment was that the truth was manipulated on a plethora of levels in order to portray the issue in a certain way. There was no fairness of reporting, no balanced argument, and it's for these reasons that the public has such a difficult time now putting their full trust in the media and in journalists. And as Black and Roberts put it, media practitioners and media consumers, they have an implicit agreement. Media that informs and persuades has a special obligation to be truth seekers and truth tellers. Truth has a high value, and when it's diminished, all of us suffer to some extent. And in this case, I think the most pertinent ethical and moral dilemma was the aversion of truth. And perhaps there needs to be a call to action to impose journalists and news corporations with harsher penalties when there's explicit disregard for journalistic ethics, such as the one in Sunrise's segment.